All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're supposed to be expecting one or two more people, so there might be a couple more people that join with us, but I want to go ahead and get you started, especially if you're on the East Coast. I know it's getting late for you guys, so I want to get going. I am Amber from Mayan Riviera Properties in Puerto Morelos, Mexico. And if you don't know where Puerto Morelos is, we're just 15 minutes south of the Cancun airport, so we're easy to find. But this is a workshop that we've done last year. This is our second year doing it online, so I hope that you find some great information. And the plan is, what I'd like to do is go through the slides, and then at the end, if you have any questions, please ask me. I'm going to open it up for questions and answers at the very end, and that way, anybody that's on the East Coast and it gets late, we won't hold them up with questions, but I'll take questions at the end. That way, whatever you want to get out of this tonight, I want to make sure that you leave with the information that you need. Hopefully we'll cover it, but if we don't, I certainly want to get it answered for you. The other thing is just as a speaking from experience suggestion, if you have a pen and paper handy, that will be handy, because typically people don't remember their questions by the end of the session, even though they think they will. So if you have a pen and paper handy, that would be great to jot down your questions and as we go, and then I'll certainly get them all answered after we're done. Okay? So I just want to thank you for joining us, and we're going to go ahead and get started. This first slide tonight says you can't have margaritas by the pool in February. And, with your savings account. And my intention with this slide was to let you know that you have, to consider your investment hi Joel, how are you? I saw you just logged in. I just muted your microphone. So same format as last week. We're just going to go through the slides, and then any questions that you might have at the end, I'm happy to answer. So again, my first slide is you can't have margaritas by the pool in February with your savings account. And my point of this slide was just to encourage you to think about a vacation home as another investment in a diversified portfolio that you might have. Okay? And so you might have investments in savings or stocks or bonds, but really you don't get a lot of personal use out of them. So I think a vacation home becomes a unique type of investment where you really get to use the money that you're saving. So it makes it an interesting type of investment. The other thing is that I wanted to bring up just in this first slide to show you that if you aren't familiar with Puerto Morelos, Mexico, all of the photos that I've taken on these slides are from Puerto. So if you're wondering where I'm getting these pictures, that's where they're at. I apologize about that. I want to make sure you guys can see this as we go. Joel knows. He followed me here from the web last week, and as we got started, it wasn't wanting to switch. So I'm hoping that the slide that you see is the one that says About MRP. And if it is, then the slides are showing correctly. I think I've got it set up the right way this time. I started Mayan Riviera Properties in the end of 2004, beginning of 2005. And I specialize in Puerto Morelos, Mexico. And, really realtors, and we'll talk a little bit about real estate agents in a bit, but it's important to find a realtor wherever you're interested in Mexico that specializes in your area. We'll get into that a little bit more. But we do three things. We do real estate sales, we do vacation rentals, and we also do property management. I'm a federally certified broker by Conocer in real estate sales and sales in tourist zones. I'm also a member of AMPI, which is the National Association of Realtors in Mexico. And I'm an international member of NAR. That's that realtor logo that you see at the bottom there. That's the National Association of Realtors in the U.S. So I'm federally certified to sell real estate. We'll get into in a little bit about what that means. But that green logo that you see at the bottom there, that's AMPI, and that's the National Association of Realtors here in Mexico. So gives you a little bit of idea where we're from. this is me. If I haven't gotten to meet you, hello. I'm originally from Michigan. I graduated from Michigan State University. I'm married with 2 children, and I've been visiting Puerto Morelos since 1998. I've been living here full-time since 2004, and I am the co-owner and broker of Mayan Riviera Properties. There are 2 realtors, myself and Kim. You'll see Kim in the next slide. And I just wanted to include our personal info. We've been living here a while. Kim's not on tonight. She's joined us for some of the workshops this month, but she's not on tonight. I just include this personal info, 1, so you get to know me a little bit better, but 2, so you know what, we've lived here for 10 years, we've got kids here, we've got kids in school, we've started businesses, I take care of clients that have all sorts of, issues and that type of thing, so I hope I bring a lot of experience to the table and I'm able to answer whatever questions you might have. This is Kim. I include her tonight just because if you happen to contact our office, you very well might talk to Kim, so you can put a face with her name. She's originally from Colorado, and she was an attorney back in Colorado for about 20 years before she started living in Puerto Morelos full time. So, we're happy to chat with you, and you'll see our information at the end so that you can contact us if you need to. These are the topics we're going to cover tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about Mexico's investment potential, and then after that, we're going to go through where is the Mayan Riviera? I include that only because I know that you guys come with interest from all other parts of Mexico, but there are a lot of people that join this workshop that are interested in this area, so it'll give you a little bit of a brief intro about what is actually considered the Mayan Riviera area. If you're interested in Puerto Morelos specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about Puerto. I'm going to skim over that because I know you guys may or may not be interested in this town in particular. Is my investment in Mexico secure? What are my financing options? What's the buying process like? We've got some buying tips about what you need to know, cost of ownership. How long can I stay in Mexico? Can you work in Mexico? What kind of medical services or insurance should I have if I'm going to live here? And what to look for in a real estate agent. We pick these questions because these are the ones that we're asked most frequently in our office. And we answer them a lot. And so we thought it would be great to kind of put this workshop together to get those questions answered. Because before you really think about doing any purchasing here, there's a lot of questions you have about, can I drive a car? Do I bring it down? How do I, what's kind of my overhead? And how does this work in general? And then I think once you get past those questions, then you can really get down to whether or not you want to buy. So the first thing that I wanted to show you is why Mexico makes an interesting investment. And so I try to keep this general because I know that, again, a lot of you guys come with interest from all parts of Mexico. So a little bit of information about the giant, these slides really just present the giant and diversified market that's interested in buying in Mexico. And that's great as a buyer. It's also great as a seller. We have a huge market in Mexico, and so this is why I feel that the potential to invest here is interesting. We have a huge international market. We have a huge domestic market as well. The property is affordable. It's easy to reach. It's easy to get here. We have great weather and the unique cultural identity of Mexico. I think the combination of those things make Mexico a really interesting place to look at if you're thinking about investing in a vacation property. I don't want to bore you with too many statistics, so I want to run through this really quick. The main point is I want to impress upon you about how many people actually visit here. And so if you own a property here and you look towards selling it, this is certainly something that you're going to be interested in seeing if you're thinking about, an investment. This slide is going to show you the number of international tourists. We're not talking about domestic tourists, we're talking about international tourists that arrived in Mexico between 2003 and 2013. And in that time period, we've seen a 29.4% increase in international tourism. So last year, 2013, we saw 24.2 million tourists in Mexico. The interesting thing about 2014, the stats that they have so far, which they've collected from January through August of 2014, to that point there were 19.3 million people. And if you compare that same January to August section of time in 2013. That's actually a 19.6 increase over those same months in 2013. So we're looking to hit another record for this year. So we've got lots of international tourists coming in. This slide, when I was putting together these workshops this month, really surprised me. I didn't realize how many people came into Mexico. And what's most interesting is the bar graph that you see on your left. The bar graph that you see on your left, you notice that there's an orange section at the top, a yellow section, a light blue section, and a dark blue section at the bottom. That orange and yellow section that you see right here, you see it makes up 24.2 million tourists. So those 24.2 million tourists are only this part here that we've talked about. To be considered a tourist in Mexico, you have to spend the night. So this is what they're talking about here. You have to spend the night. If you don't spend the night, if you come on cruise ships and you come to experience Mexico via cruise ship or via some sort of excursion, a daily excursion, that's all of these guys down here. So what's interesting is that at least exposure to Mexico and by international visitors is 78.1 million people per year. So that's a huge exposure. A lot of those people fall in love and come back. So that 24.2 million people is limited, you know, in a sense, to just the people that spend the night, but there's certainly even a bigger portion that get here at least for a day trip and get their toes in the water. This is just to show that in 2013, Mexico overall in the world ranked number 15 as an international tourist destination with their 24.2 million people. This is a list of countries. Now this is arrivals via air. Okay, so this looked at all the airline flights coming in. And just to kind of give you an idea of where all these people come from, you know, number 1 and number 2 are the U.S. and Canada, but we've got Britain and Spain and Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, France, Germany, Venezuela, Italy, Peru, Japan, Chile, Guatemala, Australia, Costa Rica, China, that's South Korea, and then Holland, Cuba, Switzerland, Ecuador, Panama. So you can see we've got a huge variety of people coming in. This one over here, oops, I'm sorry, I've hit the wrong button. This slide over here shows, you know, the number, the top 15 countries, or the top 25 countries rather, and visitors between 2011 and 2013. This one shows just January through August of 2014 of this year. And you'll notice that Colombia and Brazil kind of do a switcheroo in here. We've got our, I don't think there's any new ones. Russia kind of moves a little bit down the list, but for the most part it's the same countries that you see. India makes the list in 2014. And that's because they have opened some flights that allow some Indian tourists to get here. So on top of the international tourists, we also get the national tourists. And this is a huge part of who's interested in traveling and who's interested in buying in these tourist areas are national Mexican tourists. And then what you notice is that we've seen a huge increase over the last 10 years from 2003 to 2013. Mexico's economy is really growing. There's a huge middle class. There's a lot more expendable income. And so you see a 43.6 increase in just the domestic tourists that travel and see their own country, sort of at an unprecedented level at this point. I know that a lot of you come, again, interested in different areas. I just wanted to include a quick, you know, we're in the state of Quintana Roo here, just south of Cancun. And so this shows in our state what you get as far as a mix of national and international tourists. You get 3.3 million national tourists and 7.5 million international tourists that stay the night in a hotel in Quintana Roo in 2013. So that kind of shows you, you know, of those 24.2 million that we mentioned, 11 million come to this coast. So this gets a big section of that. If any of you guys are interested in these stats, this is where I pulled them from. It's a public website that's put out by the government of Mexico, and so you're welcome to take a look at those. That kind of gave you a preview of just how many people are coming. I think that's important, again, when you look at buying and when you look at selling. Mexico is a huge international destination, not only for travel, but also a major international retirement destination for a lot of people. And so it makes it an interesting area to invest. On top of the traffic that it gets, it's also very affordable. I'm speaking about the market that I know best, which is Puerto Morelos, and I can tell you that in Puerto Morelos, oceanfront condos start at $250,000 and would range, anywhere from $250 to $275 up to $600,000, depending on size and location, things like that. Homes in town start at about $250,000. Now your oceanfront houses, those get to be really big. We're talking about 4, 5, 6-bedroom homes, and they're going to start at about $700,000 and go up from there to $1 million plus. We're kind of unique in Puerto Morelos in that we're sort of a protected enclave of property, and so town is only 3 blocks deep, which means that at the most we're all 2 blocks from the beach, so we're all close to the beach. A huge advantage in Mexico is property taxes. We have very low property taxes when you compare our taxes to taxes in other parts of the world that are popular vacation destinations. If you look at property tax rates in British Columbia or Phoenix or California, Hawaii, they're paying a lot more because they have non-homesteaded tax rates. And in Mexico, they don't have homesteaded versus non-homesteaded tax rates. And then on top of that, the tax rate is really low. Now, the tax rate is set by your municipality. Our municipio or municipality is Benito Juarez here. And so our tax rate on constructed residential property is 0.26% of the tax value of the property. So if you've got a tax valued property of $500,000, that puts you at about $1,300 US as far as taxes go a year. And so you see that there's a significant savings there. I had I like to tell this analogy, I had a guy that was interested in Puerto Morelos, ended up buying a house. He had nearly an identical house in Florida. And same amount of square footage of home, same amount of frontage in front of the beach, about 100 square feet, same bedroom, same, it was a very, very comparable property. And he went from paying about between, let's call it $2,500, $2,700 a year here in comparison to his Key West property where he was paying almost $23,000 a year. So there's a significant tax savings in what you're going to pay on your vacation home. People are interested in the Mexican market because of the fact that you have this broad market that we've talked about. All these people come from other places. It sort of spreads the risk. So if the economy in the U.S. happens to be down, but Canada's booming or Europe's doing well, you've got a lot of different people to draw from. And what that means is our market is really stable. We don't see the huge flux in prices that some of the vacation properties have done in the U.S. and Canada. And so part of it is due to the variety of people that are interested in buying here, just the huge market. The other thing that has a substantial difference is that there's no mortgage mess. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but if you're interested in buying in Mexico, you've got to come in with cash. And so you've got to get that cash from however you access that back home. And so you don't have the foreclosure crisis happen in Mexico like you had in the U.S. You don't have somebody in your condo building selling for half of what you bought it for because the bank is liquidating it, which drags everybody's property values down. That doesn't happen here. And so, our prices remain very, very stable and have fared very, very well compared to other markets, especially when you start comparing second home markets. Our properties are rentable. Now in Puerto Morelos, our rental season is a little shorter. We go from Christmas through Easter. You might find that some areas of Mexico you're interested in, your vacation rental season might be a bit longer, but you can certainly rent that property and get some income that way. In a lot of these tourist areas, you're going to be able to find property managers that can look after your property if you're not planning on living here full-time, or maybe not planning on living here full-time yet. Canadians, if we've got any Canadians in the house tonight, you have to be very, very careful about the estate tax that's in the U.S. I'm a U.S. citizen and have lots of Canadian friends that live here, and they've sort of veered from purchasing property in the U.S. because of the estate tax consequences that come with investing in the United States. If you're interested in more about that, please ask me, and I'm happy to get into that if we've got any Canadians that are listening tonight. The other thing that I think is a really undervalued perk extremely undervalued, is that you can swap homes with other vacation owners basically anywhere in the world. Clearly, if you own a home outside your country, you are probably a traveler. And one thing that I don't think enough people take advantage of is some of the online networks that are available to you as a homeowner that owns a vacation property, whereby you can swap directly with another person, or you can put it into a pool of properties, so you don't necessarily have to find one person that wants to switch with you, per destination. And so you're a little bit more flexible. And I know people that do take advantage of this, and they travel all over the world and never pay for a night in a place. It's a really, really great perk about owning that I think a lot of people should take advantage of. A little bit about the Riviera Maya. If you're interested in the Riviera Maya, which is the Mexican way, the Spanish way of the Mexican name for saying the Mayan Riviera in English. Either way, Riviera Maya or Mayan Riviera. I put this slide in here to talk about what the Mayan Riviera is, and I do this because I sit on the plane, and when I come down, or back and forth when I travel, I ask people, hey, where are you coming? Where are you staying? Da, da, da. Oh, we're staying in the Mayan Riviera. Where? Oh, in the Mayan Riviera. So I'm here to allow you to answer that question a bit better if you ever come and visit us. The Mayan Riviera is a stretch of coastline that consists of a lot of different cities, and so the Mayan Riviera is a pretty vague destination, and what's really neat about the Mayan Riviera is it's very vague when you consider that each town is very, very different from one another. Even though they might be on a relatively close stretch of coastline, each town has its own flavor, its own sort of claims to fame, and so you will find something that you like. There's a place for everybody. Cancun is at the top of the Mayan Riviera. Just south of Cancun, we're the first stop, south of Cancun, Puerto Morelos. Our claim to fame is, we're probably the most authentic Mexican town on the coast. We're small. We're sort of a little Mexican fishing village. When you get south of us, you get into Playa del Carmen. Then there's a few places that you don't see on that map that are a little bit smaller, like Acamal and Puerto Aventuras, a big marina community. And then you get down into Tulum. So Tulum is the southernmost part of the Mayan Riviera. After that becomes an area they call the Costa Maya, if you've ever heard of that. So the Mayan Riviera stretches from Cancun to Tulum, and you have anywhere from sort of very sophisticated Palm Springs to sort of laid back, very hippie type feeling of some of the more casual places on the coast. So it is certainly varied, and I definitely encourage you, if you're interested in this area, to come and visit the different towns, and you will find one that appeals to you, I'm sure. One of the great things that keeps people interested in this area and coming is our fantastic weather. When you see weather averages, they can be misleading sometimes, because if you have really hot weather and really cold weather, your average temperature seems pretty moderate when you've got those extremes. In our case, it's pretty. Our highs, which you see in the orange, and our average lows, which you see in the blue, these are in Celsius, are pretty accurate. They're a pretty accurate reflection of what you're going to see any given day here on the coast, and it's very nice and it's very temperate. We don't get really hot, and we don't get nearly as cold as places like Arizona and those types of places do. So that's another great reason to come, and it's another great reason that people get interested in investing in retirement property down here. Not just you, but also the market that might buy your investment down the road. The last thing that I think really is a draw for this area of Mexico in particular is that you can basically get to Cancun from just about anywhere in the world for a pretty reasonable price and in a fairly quick time. It's amazing how fast you can get to Cancun from most destinations in Canada and the U.S. You can see right here, this is direct flights to the Cancun airport. The numbers listed, that's the flight time in hours. And you can see you can get from most major cities in Cancun, in under, for the most part, in under 5.5 hours. In the U.S., I always say I'm from Detroit, and Detroit they listed it at 4 hours. It's really about 3 hours and 45 minutes, 3 hours and 30 minutes if you get a good tailwind. But this isn't an all-inclusive list, but this is certainly some of the major stops that you can get to. And again, these are direct flights right here into the Cancun airport. We have lots of clients that just come in for a long weekend when they have a place because it's easy. You're not having to get on a ferry or take another jumper flight or anything to get here. Puerto Morelos is nice because we're just 15 minutes south of the airport, so we're just a hop, skip, and jump to get to your condo. And then, not only from the U.S. and Canada, which happens to be the biggest probably community of expats that we have here in Porto, but this whole Mayan Riviera coast, Cancun Mayan Riviera coast, gets visited by a wide variety of tourists. And you can see all of the direct flights that come in from all of these international destinations all over Europe, South America, Asia. We get lots and lots of flights in from all over. They recently opened that flight from Moscow I guess it's been about 2 years now, and that's been, certainly Moscow's a place you want to get out of in the wintertime for weather reasons, and we definitely have people on a direct flight from Moscow every day. Puerto Morelos, I want to give you a quick preview of Porto if you're interested in our town in particular, and that's what brought you here to the workshop tonight. Again, I've talked about our proximity to the Cancun airport. We're actually closer to the Cancun airport than most of Cancun is. Our claim to fame, as I mentioned, every town not down the coast is a little bit different. Our biggest claim to fame is that we're the most authentic, probably Mexican feeling on the coast. And so if you're looking for sort of old Mexico, this is probably as old Mexico as you're going to get on the Riviera Maya. We have a national park out front, and we have protected mangroves that surround our town, which means that it's a very, very low density, very sort of exclusive enclave of property because it can't grow any bigger than it already is. And the national park means not only do we have amazing reefs that are stocked with beautiful fish because the fishing is restricted inside the reef, we also have restricted water activities. So that means that you can kayak and swim and do all windsurf, kite surf, do all those types of things. But water, there's no parasailing, there's no jet skiing, so it's a very natural beach. It makes it really, really great to swim. The other thing is that we've got this reef, so Puerto Morelos is the snorkeling mecca of probably the Western Hemisphere next to the Great Barrier Reef. We have some amazing snorkeling. And for those of you that don't know, the world's second largest barrier reef runs from just north of Cancun all the way to Honduras, but it's at its shallowest in Puerto Morelos. So while you might go diving in Cozumel, Porto's claim to fame is certainly its snorkeling, and also there are spots that are deep and beautiful dives. Because it's sort of created this enclave, for lack of a better term, but this enclave of homes that are oceanside, it becomes a really, really great investment. It's some of the best residential real estate values on the coast. And for those of you that haven't visited, you'll see in that picture, that's our leaning lighthouse. It's basically our town icon. It was tipped in, I think, Hurricane Beulah in the 50s, and it stood that way, tipped over for quite a while. A little bit more information about Puerto Morelos. I can speak to Puerto Morelos because I've lived here long enough. But if you're interested in other areas of Mexico, these might be things that you might be interested in or things that you might want to check out when you go to see if they have available, if these types of things interest you. We've got a really active expat as well as local community. We're full of international fishing tournaments, tons of festivals. This weekend is going to be the National Beer Festival. So in the town square, we're going to be having lots of artisan and microbrew Mexican beers to try. There's wine festivals, there's music festivals, all sorts of things going on. We have a very active Casa de la Cultura. If you're interested in buying in Mexico, check out the Casa de la Cultura in your town. The idea behind it is it's sort of a community center, and if you're good at something, maybe you teach a class, it's offered very affordably so everybody can afford to go. And then if you can afford to pay more, then great, make a donation, because certainly it's not government supported or it doesn't run on government grants. So everything that they do and all the programs that they put on are funded by the community. And we have an excellent Casa de la Cultura in Puerto Morelos. We're very, very fortunate, and they are They're actually responsible for a lot of the festivals and things that we have in town, as well as some really great entertainment, live entertainment in the parks, and lots of classes. You know, you can go to the Casa de la Cultura and take dance classes, Pilates classes, yoga classes, Mayan language classes. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Art, all sorts of things. There are Rotary clubs. If you're into charity work, you know, there are Rotary clubs, different charity groups that support local schools. If you're an animal lover, there's always charity groups that, you know, will take care of some of the local animal, dogs and cat population, things like that. If you're a golfer, you're in luck. Most of the tourist destinations in Mexico are full of amazing golf courses, and certainly the Mayan Riviera and Puerto Morelos is no exception. And we've got lots of great golf courses within a quick drive of our town. You'll find expat groups, or as well as locals mixed, that do, you know, book clubs. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And so if you're interested in those types of activities, or you're interested in that type of socialization, check out your area and see what they might offer. One of the advantages to moving to the Riviera Maya, if you are thinking about making the leap, is that language really isn't an obstacle. If you come down and, you know, maybe you only speak Spanish at first, I certainly encourage you to learn Spanish, but if you're only speaking English when you get here, not a problem. You can probably squeak by. Most people speak at least a little bit of English here, and so compared to other destinations, I think you'll have a much easier time getting your feet in the water and getting started here than maybe elsewhere. When I first came to Puerto Morelos in 1998, I can't say that we had Sam's Club and Costco and Walmart and Home Depot in Cancun nearby. Those were not available, so I would say maybe moving down was a bigger leap then than what it probably is now. People might think that moving to a foreign country is a big step, and it is. But when you can get down and kind of get by with English for a little bit until you learn your Spanish, and when you've got, you know, Costco and Sam's Club and Walmart and Home Depot, you also aren't for a lack of supplies. So it's not as big of a jump as you might think, I guess, is what my point was with that. We're in Puerto Morelos. We're 20 minutes from first-class restaurants and venues in Cancun and Playa del Carmen. I'm just fixing to buy some tickets this weekend. We're going to go see Cirque du Soleil, about 10 minutes south of Puerto Morelos, on its way to Playa del Carmen. And so we're fortunate to have lots of amazing things to do in this area, and certainly there are other areas of Mexico that are as fortunate as well. If you're interested in this particular coast, you know, for instance, the beaches are absolutely amazing. Our beaches are crushed coral sand, and because they're crushed coral, they don't get hot on your feet, which is great if you're a beach bum. You'll love that. But Puerto Morelos in particular got picked for the 2013 TripAdvisor Reader Choice Awards. It was in the top 10 beaches in Mexico, so that's fun. Certainly in our area of Mexico, we've got lots of Mayan ruins and culture. You'll see in other areas of Mexico more folk art culture, Aztec ruins, perhaps, depending on the parts that you're in. You know, Mexico is such a diverse and amazing country as far as their cultural, the cultural offerings that they have. Again, if you're a golfer, at least on this coast, we have the only international TPC course. We have a PGA course. The PGA tournament runs in November, the Mayakoba Classic. And we've got all sorts of, you know, top-notch golf courses designed by some of the best golf course designers in the world. And so we're an excellent golf destination, and we are not alone. If you look into some of the other resort areas of Mexico, you'll definitely find it's the same. I had mentioned Puerto Morelos is sort of the mecca of snorkeling. It is national park waters, and our snorkeling and diving are pretty amazing. If you're on the coast, and you're a boater or a fisherman looking to see what fishing or boating opportunities there might be, Puerto Morelos does have a full-service marina. Let's try marina. It has a full-service marina, as well as some pretty big ocean sport fishing tournaments. If you're a sport fisherman, you'll know that on the west coast by the Baja, they do a lot of fishing tournaments as well. If you are a fly fisherman or you want to spin fish in the flats, we also have that within a short drive of us, and so that's a lot of fun fishing. And so if you are a fisherman or a boater, you're in luck. You've got lots of options here on the Mayan Riviera, as well as elsewhere in Mexico. That last slide there, attention foodies, that's me. I'm the foodie. Mexico is one of, I think they might have named another country now at this point, but Mexico was the first UNESCO World Heritage Site for its food. Mexican food varies a lot depending on which region you're in, and so do not expect the Tex-Mex that you might get at the local Mexican restaurant. It's probably a far cry from what you're going to get in a lot of authentic Mexican restaurants in your area. And certainly as you travel, you'll get to be more familiar with a lot of the different Mexican cuisine because it certainly varies by region. Once you kind of see the appeal of Mexico and maybe you're interested and you understand what a great investment it is, then you get down to the brass tacks of, okay, how do I own, how do I buy? And this is the portion that's going to try to address that. One thing that I think hangs people up when they first think about buying in Mexico is the concept of, how do I own in Mexico? I always get people, is it a 99-year lease? How does it work? And so I want to step back and explain how you own and why you own in that way. To answer the question, can I own property in Mexico? The answer is a very simple yes. Okay? What makes the question a valid question, though, and one that does take a little bit of explaining, is that Mexico does have a restricted zone. So when you look at Mexico, there's this uneven border all the way around Mexico. The red lines are coastal borders. The yellow lines are international borders. If you buy property along an international border, the restricted zone extends 100 kilometers in from that international border. If you buy property along coastal borders of Mexico, then that coastal border restricted zone is 50 kilometers of the borderline. So it forms this uneven ring around the country. And why is it there? Well, I think once you understand why it's there, then it makes a little bit more sense as to how this works. If you go back to the Mexican Revolution, just prior to the Mexican Revolution, the Mexicans revolted because Spain was occupying 98% of their country, okay? And they had had enough, and they were going to kick them out. And they did. And it's a long and fascinating history, and it's definitely worth it. If you are a history buff, you will enjoy it. But it's a long history and a long fight, and they finally create their constitution around 1900. And when they do that, they consider it a matter of national security to limit the foreign ownership in this restricted zone that they've established, which we've talked about being this uneven border around the country. And so what they said at that time in their constitution, first their constitution creates the restricted zone, and then they said no foreign ownership within that zone. And so it's actually written into their constitution that foreigners cannot own property in the restricted zone. And obviously that came out of a fear of really the Spanish coming back and buying land along their borders and bringing back in people and artillery and taking back some of the assets they had, these huge haciendas and these mines and things like that. So it was a matter of national security for them. It still remains a matter of national security concern now. However, that being said, they have certainly opened up to foreign investment. So think of the advent of tourism and airplanes and all the things that didn't exist when they first created this constitution. Mexico has warmed up to foreign investment a lot. We have huge amounts of foreign investment dollars pouring into this country. And part of that is in ownership of land. So how is it done? Well, what happens is they still have this constitutional clause that sets up this restricted zone. And so what Mexico did in a series of congressional acts in the 1990s is basically they created a trust. And it's the same type of asset trust or real estate trust that you might be familiar with in the States or Canada. If you set up a family trust or something like that, it works very similarly to that. You can own property as a foreigner via a trust in the restricted zone. Now we're going to talk about why I also recommend you own via trust in other zones of Mexico. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But it is true, if you buy in central Mexico, you do not require, obviously there's no constitutional requirement for this trust. However, I do recommend it. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So what is this trust? Well, if you start looking around on the internet and you've done any research, you see it's called the fideicomiso. And the fideicomiso is a bank trust. It works very similarly to an asset trust that you might find in Canada or the U.S. Your family, set up a trust, that type of thing. The main exception being that in Mexico, the administrators of the trust have to be a federally authorized bank. Whereas at least I know in the U.S. and I think also in Canada, there are some other private entities that can administrate trusts. Not so in Mexico. You have to be a federally authorized bank. You, and I mean when I say you, I mean you the foreigner, so Mr. and Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Smith or Mr. Smith, however, whatever personal combination you fit your circumstances. You as an individual or an LLC or a foreign company, if you have, a U.S. My Investments LLC, can be the primary beneficiaries of the trust, okay? And primary beneficiaries can also appoint secondary beneficiaries. We'll talk about why that's important. If you own, we'll talk about that in a minute as to why it's important, but basically what that allows is you to be the primary beneficiary of the trust, and as the primary beneficiary of the trust, you have all rights of use. You can construct whatever you please. It's yours, just as if you own it. But if you should pass away, the way most of these trusts are set up, let's say it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith that buy. Well, most of these trusts are set up to say that if anything should happen to Mr. Smith, then his portion of the asset would go to Mrs. Smith. And if, God forbid, something should happen to the both of them, then it would pass on to the secondary beneficiaries, which they've named in the trust, in designated percentages. What does that mean? Well, the advantage is that it makes inheritance of these properties very easy. If you're considering investing outside of your home country, if you're Canadian, you're thinking about investing in, outside of Canada. If you're from the U.S. and you're thinking about investing outside of the U.S., you do not want a property ending up being lost or significant money spent because it's tied up in probate if anything should happen to you. And so this is why a trust comes in very handy. Mexico happens to require it within the restricted zone, but my suggestion would be that no matter where you're at, whether you're in the interior of Mexico or you're looking in Costa Rica or wherever you are, you put it into a trust, because that's a legally recognized entity within that country that very easily allows a property to pass to its heirs without, with essentially avoiding the probate process, I think, in just about all countries. So it's definitely worth looking into. There are plenty of people that own in the interior of Mexico that still put their properties in trust just because of the inheritance issue. It makes owning property in a foreign country much easier because you already have essentially a will for that, a legally recognized will in that country set up via the trust for that asset that says what happens if you should pass. These trusts in Mexico currently have a term of 50 years. It used to be 30. They extended it to 50. There's even been talk of them extending it even longer. But at this point, it's 50 years, and they are renewable into perpetuity. That means at the end of 50 years, you just let the government know that you want to continue with your trust, and they renew it for another term. If it's 50 years at that time, you'll get another 50 years. And you can keep that going as long as you wish. The only way that I am aware that you can lose property that is in trust is if you're ever charged with if you're convicted of a federal crime. And if you're convicted of a federal crime, then they have the right to seize assets and things like that. But other than that, it's a very secure way to own the property. One note here about answering the question, can I own in Mexico? There's rumors about people buying property and it was Mexican land, government land, and the people never owned it, et cetera, et cetera. That gets into foreigners getting into the mess called ejido, and you see that word down at the bottom, E-J-I-D-O. Ejido land is fascinating. It's a very interesting cooperative land system where the government of Mexico owns huge portions of land which they give to Mexican citizens to allow them to use and have possession rights to, and form sort of their own autonomous governments. It's a bit like Crown land in Canada. It's probably most analogous to a situation of like a Native American reservation in the U.S. Not entirely similar, but the same idea. And that comes out of the Mexican Revolution. When you go back to, why they made the restricted zone, Well, when they kicked out Spain, most of the Mexicans were working as feudal serfs on haciendas and didn't have any money and weren't landowners, and now you have an entire country that needs to get back to work, and they have no money to get started, and they've got no land to work. So what do? Well, the Mexican government then says, we're going to set up these ejidos, which are basically land cooperatives, and you all can be autonomous, basically micro-governments over this land and decide what you want to do with it. But ejido rights are only between Mexican citizens. So unless you have a Mexican citizenship, you don't have rights to ejido land. And some foreigners have tried to do, get in on ejido land, and obviously they either have to put it in someone else's name, but they don't have any rights to the property. So without spending any more time on it, I just want you to make you aware that ejido property is occasionally out there. When you look in the Mayan Riviera, unless you're looking at pretty remote land, this is not going to be an issue. Moral of the story is you want to stick to titled land as a foreigner, and with titled land you will not have an issue. The other thing that I want to bring up really quickly is that if you've been following the news at all, you've heard that Mexico was going to do away with the fideicomiso. There was a proposal in the Senate to just get rid of the fideicomiso in the restricted zone, and if anybody has any questions about that, to let you know, it died. It didn't go on, and it didn't make the other house, and so it is a dead bill at this point. So fideicomiso is still required, and I would submit to you that it is recommended for those inheritance reasons. So once you understand how owning in Mexico works, then you say, is my investment secure? Okay, well, all right, so we've got these fideicomiso bank trusts. Is that a good way to own property? My answer is yes. Okay. We've talked about the advantage as far as inheritance goes. Okay. As far as it being an international asset that you own outside of your home country. So yes, it's secure that way. The other thing is that our agency uses licensed bonded escrow accounts in order for you to be able to purchase your property. So your transaction is secure when you purchase. Know that in Mexico at this point there are no licensed bonded insurance escrow agencies in Mexico. That legal framework really doesn't exist. So your real estate agent ought to be using licensed and bonded escrow agencies in the United States in order to fund your purchases, your down payment, and the monies that you put in just prior to closing are safe in an escrow account that's been licensed and bonded. So that's how you want to make sure you're purchasing. First American and Stewart Title also both offer title insurance policies on fideicomiso bank trusts. So it's your option. Obviously, it's not a requirement that you purchase it, but it does speak a lot to the legitimacy of the system that the two largest title insurance companies in the United States are willing to insure your Mexican fideicomiso. Fideicomisos are also, people ask me, I didn't get this question until after Lehman Brothers collapsed and the banks started going crazy in the U.S. is, well, you've got these federally authorized banks, what happens when one closes or what happens when one collapses? And it's a good question. So you should know that your fideicomiso aren't, they're not considered assets of the bank. They're highly regulated. They can't leverage it in any way. So the fiscal stability of a bank has nothing to do with the security of your fideicomiso. We didn't have any banks collapse in Mexico, so it hasn't been an issue to date. But if for some reason that would happen, then your bank, it would simply transfer to another federally authorized bank in order to administrate your trust. The other thing is that you have the security of your investment because it's backed by the NAFTA treaty if you're a member of the U.S. or Canada, because the three countries are within the NAFTA treaty, and so you are offered some protections through that because you're making contracts between the three countries. Okay, now you know if you can buy. Now you know if it's secure. Then the next question is, how do I buy? Well, the first thing you need to buy is you need to come up with the funds and a budget. And to do that, you ought to know what your financing options are. And this is where a lot of people take a step back and really figure out, okay, can I make this work? Because we talked a little bit about, when we talked about why our prices are so stable, is that you cannot go to Mexico and take out a traditional mortgage on a house as a foreigner. It's very hard to do if you're a Mexican, but it's impossible to do as a foreigner. So basically, properties in Mexico are purchased in cash. Okay? The exceptions to that would be any owner or developer financing. And the thing to know about these is that they're typically not at what you would consider great interest rates. A lot of times I've seen developer financing at 8 or 9%. But the other thing is that they're not intended to be 30-year mortgages. There's typically really short-term options to give people a little bit of flexibility if they're even available. But, you know, you might see owner financing for 6 months or a year. You might see developer financing sometimes for 2 or 3 years, but nobody's a bank. Nobody's going to do a 30-year loan. So those might be some short-term options that give you a little bit of flexibility if you're looking for them. So how do you come up with the cash in your home country? Well, you probably know better than anyone else how you might do that. Some suggestions that I have are, take a home equity loan. If you look up HELOC loans, HELOC, home equity loans, those are a way to withdraw equity from a home that you already own in your home country and use that to purchase property. Some people just have credit lines that they use with their banks. U.S. citizens can use self-directed IRA funds to purchase property, including international property, so that might be another source of financing for you. But the important thing to know is that your bank, as far as I know, if you come up with a bank that will let you, please let me know, but as far as I know, no U.S. or Canadian bank is going to allow you to use the Mexican property as the collateral, okay? So you've got to come up with the funds on your own with assets that you own in your home country. I want to talk just a little bit about the buying process, okay? Walk you through what you can expect if you're thinking about buying. And that is, you're going to, the buyer is going to present an offer to purchase to the seller. I'm hoping you're using a professional real estate agent to do that so that your offer has all the terms that it ought to have in it to keep you protected. You're going to present the possible, offer to purchase. Perhaps there's some negotiation about some terms. Let's say you come to a final agreement. What happens then? Well, then the buyer is going to go ahead and put earnest money into escrow accounts. We've already talked about it's important to use a licensed bonded escrow agency to do that. And at this point, those are all foreign accounts. Once that escrow money comes in, the buyer is basically locked into buying that property, with the exception of unless the title obviously wasn't clear, and that would be in the offer to purchase. So what happens then? The notary is going to perform due diligence on the property. He's going to make sure that the title is free and clear in order for it to transfer. And once he gives the nod that all the paperwork is good and we're good to go, then the fideicomiso bank, if there's a fideicomiso bank involved because you need a trust, they're going to file for a permit to go ahead and open that trust. And know that when you purchase a property in Mexico, if it's already in fideicomiso, if it's owned by a foreigner already, you have the option of transferring the existing fideicomiso or establishing a new trust. And your agent can walk you through whether it might be better, one option or the other. There's not always a standard answer to that. You kind of got to look at what your plans are with the property and what the costs are in a cost comparison as to what might be a better option for you. The bank sends off for that permit at the foreign ministry at the Ministry of Foreign Investment. The Ministry of Foreign Investment will send back that permit and say, "Yep, bank, you're ready to open that new trust." And when they do, you can go ahead and schedule closing. One thing to note is that in Mexico, we're old school. You got to be present. There's no faxing. There's no FedExing papers, that type of thing. You got to be sitting in the notary's office the day of closing to sign. So if you're not available, then you have to be represented by somebody who has your power of attorney. So there's a little bit of coordinating for closing. And then how long does this take? Well, the thing is that if you have terms that just say everybody's ready to close as soon as everything is ready, there's not any time clause that says we need 6 months or something like that. Supposing it's just a standard offer and we're ready to close as soon as closing documentation is ready, it can be anywhere from 30 to 60 days, 90 days at the longest. Really, the interesting thing about buying is that once the notary's done all the due diligence and has given the nod, the property's really ready to close, except for you're waiting on this permit from the bank. And the day the permit comes in, theoretically, the notary probably needs about a business day to get the papers together for you to sign the buy-sell contract. But after that, he could probably close, the following day. The issue is that a lot of times one or two parties might be foreigners, and you've got to make travel arrangements. And so that's really where it comes down to, what works for both parties in order to get down and get these closing documents signed and the money transferred. So expect 30 to 60 days to close. Talking about some buying tips. In order to begin, there's some basic questions you might want to know. What's your budget? Okay, that's a great place to start. And I say that because as a real estate agent, if you think you're going to be in the $700,000, $750,000 in budget, and you look at those properties, and then you go home and you figure out that really the bank's not going to give you as much as maybe you thought on your house or whatever, and really what your budget is $200,000, those properties have really, really great options sitting at $250,000, but they're not even going to hold a candle probably to the properties you just walked through, and so you kind of set yourself up for some disappointment there. So really do your homework and find out what your budget is, and you can really start narrowing down to the properties that are of most interest to you. Consider size when you start thinking about what you need. How much space do you really need? And I say that because sometimes people come down and they'll say, oh, we need 3 bedrooms because we've got 3 kids and all the kids are going to come down with the grandkids and everybody's going to be here, and they buy these huge places, and that's great, and I certainly hope that they do, and sometimes they do, but sometimes the reality is those kids never get to come down all at the same time, and really they could have bought a much smaller, maybe if they're buying condos, maybe they could buy a much smaller condo and have been oceanfront within their budget, and then just swapped some time with some neighboring condo owners, if their kids are only coming down once a year, if that. So really think about and assess the space that you really logistically need. Another thing to ask yourself, is oceanfront a must? If you're looking in Puerto Morelos or any other coastal town in Mexico, you're going to pay a premium to be on the beach. And some people say, I have to be on the beach, and that's it. And they're willing to pay that price. And other folks say, you know what, if I take a step off the beach, I get a lot more house for my money. And so think about that. It will affect your budget and what you can buy. Are you a condo person or are you a private house person? This is a question I get a lot. What's better, a condo or a house? I can tell you that there's a market for both, and there are advantages to both. You've really got to assess whether you're a condo person or you're a private house person. If you want to jet in and out of a place and maybe you're not going to be there all that often, or you don't want all the maintenance, then consider a condo. If you are maybe you bring dogs down, or you spend a lot of time, or you just like the privacy, then you might be a house person. Really think about that so that you make sure you buy where what fits your lifestyle the best. At least in Puerto Morelos, we kind of have things that are right in town, and then things that are sort of quieter and outside of town. And do you want to be just steps from the grocery store? Certainly, it's going to be busier and louder, but it's also going to be really convenient. So think about where you want to be, and then. Is rental income a factor? If you're going to be renting this as a vacation rental, maybe the properties, at least in Puerto Morelos, sometimes it's easier to rent properties that are in town versus out of town because tourists don't have to necessarily rent a car. And so if vacation income is a big factor, then consider what parts of town are the most easily rented, okay? Number 2, basically this gets back to your budget. When you do your shopping, before you do your shopping, do your homework and find out what kind of budget you can work with. And number 3, when you're figuring that budget, plan on about 6 to 8% in closing costs, and make sure you figure those in so that you know ultimately what price point you need to be looking at when you go to start looking at properties. Number 4 is use the same common sense that you would apply to a transaction at home. And I always feel like I'm preaching to the choir when I say that, because anybody that's going to log on and take an online workshop about buying in Mexico is probably a pretty diligent person. So I think I'm probably preaching to the wrong people. But I say this because every year I talk to people that get what I call margarita fever, and they do really silly things. There's people that are very, very competent business people back at home that come down and meet somebody and shake hands and give them a bunch of cash and come back in a year and those people are gone, or maybe that guy never even owned the property. It was like the caretaker, or who knows, you know. You just think, would you have ever done something like that at home? And they would go, no, never. But they do it here. It's so odd. So, you know, the moral of the story is that things might be different. You might not be familiar with a notary system or something like that, and I want to walk you through that so you are. But don't think that the same general rules of common sense don't apply. That's always a good thing to keep in mind. Although, like I said, I always feel like I'm probably not talking to the right group of people that are logging in to really learn about and do their homework. Number 5, this is important. It's probably less important than it was. You'll still find some bad information online that if you're a foreigner and you want to buy property in a restricted zone in Mexico, you want to open up a Mexican corporation to do so. That is not the case. You do not want to open a Mexican corporation unless it is your true intent to own a business. You want to buy that property and put it into a fideicomiso trust. By putting it into a corporation, you're obligating yourself to corporate tax filing obligations in Mexico, which are monthly, not annually, but monthly. So you're paying an accountant to file for you with no activity every month, and you're also in a corporate tax bracket. So it is not to your advantage to do that. And if you see anything like that online, it's just absolutely false. It was never accurate to begin with. It's not even outdated. It's just wrong. Another thing, and this kind of leads into this, is number 6, which is be informed. And the laws in Mexico are modernizing a lot. They're constantly changing. And as a realtor in AMPI, we're constantly receiving market updates and, you know, breaking news type things to keep us posted on what's happening in this real estate market with the real estate laws that are consistently getting better and more comprehensive and changing. And so one of the things that you need to be aware of when I guess anytime you do an internet search, but particularly when you start looking at property in Mexico, is consider the source when you find information online. Number 1, if it's more than a year or 2 old, it's probably outdated. It's probably no longer accurate. The other thing is that when you start sort of searching around in the cobwebs of the internet about buying property in Mexico, there are lots of who I like to call sort of gringo bobs pontificating about how you buy property in Mexico. And those guys, while their intentions might be sincere, are probably not offering some of the best advice. So again, just be aware of your sources when you're looking online at some of this stuff. And this is one of the reasons we offer this workshop. So hopefully, if you haven't taken it tonight, maybe somebody stumbles upon it on YouTube and gets some good information that's accurate. Here's a huge one. If you take anything away from this workshop tonight, it is number 7, and that is you need to list your property at the full purchase price. So if you're paying $100,000 for a place, your deed needs to list the operation price at $100,000. It sounds obvious. I say that because there was a very long-standing practice in Mexico that was very common where people would underreport the value that they paid, and that is no longer possible. The anti-money laundering laws require disclosure of all of the funds for purchasing, so it's not possible that way. The other thing is that you set yourself up for a big capital gains issue once you go to sell. This is not advisable, and if you are working maybe with a seller directly or with a with somebody who is not competent, then this might come up, and this is not something that you ever want to do. It is tax fraud at the very least, and at the very most. Now, the exception to that would be is if you happen to buy a property, and this happens a lot in tourist areas, if you happen to buy a property that's fully or partially furnished. So let's say you looked at a condo and it's fully furnished, you know, sheets, towels, furniture, the whole 9 yards, and it was $350,000, okay? Well, when you make that offer to purchase, what a lot of times they'll do is they'll say, okay, I'm going to pay $350,000 for this property, and $20,000 of that will be designated toward the contents, and the balance will go toward the actual real property, you know, the physical property itself. And so in that circumstance, if you're paying $350,000 for something and you had allotted $20,000 for the contents, then $330 would be your registered purchase price, and that's completely legitimate and acceptable. You're not required to pay acquisition taxes or capital gains taxes if you're the seller on used furniture, and that's completely appropriate, but that is the exception to the rule. Other than that, you do need to list your properties at full purchase price. You will be saving yourself a lot of headache by doing so. If you are considering purchasing pre-sale in Mexico, and pre-sale is while things are under construction, so it's not a finished product yet, the titles, haven't been issued on the individual properties. If you are, you need to be very, very diligent. You need to hire an attorney on your behalf that's experienced in pre-sales and have them review the contracts and make sure that you are dotting your I's and crossing your T's, because you don't always have the same consumer rights in Mexico that you might expect from your home countries. At least in the U.S., what happens a lot of times is when you buy pre-sale, your money goes into an escrow account, and the developer is using the money, the performance, once they meet certain quotas of a certain amount of pre-sales, and the bank will issue certain monies for construction. And so your monies are, held in escrow until such time that you can title. In Mexico, that's not usually the case. What's usually the case is in pre-sales, there's a bigger risk because you are putting up money that probably the developer is taking and using to build the project. And so you want to make sure that you are protected. And so you need to be very diligent in those cases. We've talked about closings. It says 60 to 90 days, and it says 60 to 90 days. I mentioned 30 days, and that's because just in the last little bit, these permits from the banks have been coming back much, much faster than they ever have before. So if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd have said it took 60 to 90 days to complete, and that's how long you should anticipate for closing. But we've kind of moved that up recently, and I'm not going to complain by any stretch. You should expect anywhere from, as soon as 30 days to 90 days. And again, that really depends on how fast the permit comes back from the foreign ministry, and it also, the Ministry of Foreign Investment. And it also depends on the travel plans and the travel requirements of the two parties that need to sign. So it can vary a bit. The other thing that I want to talk about is using a qualified realtor, and please don't be afraid to ask them questions. You guys are signed into this, so you are certainly interested in knowing about this topic. Don't be afraid to ask your realtor questions. One of the things about using a professional realtor that is a huge advantage is if they're intimately familiar with the area that they're selling. When we talked about the Mexican Revolution, and we talked about how the outcome of that created that atmosphere of, they weren't so keen on foreign investment, so they created this restricted zone because it was a matter of national security. At that same time, they were establishing the public registry of lands, right? Because now they took back their country, they revolted, and now they can buy and sell their own properties amongst themselves. And now you've got, your public registry of property. Well, there is a public registry of property, but your registry information is not public. So it is a private information. You can't go to the public registry in Mexico and find out who owns a lot and how much they paid for it. And so the MLS systems in Mexico are a little bit different because it's not a database of comparable real estate that's been sold. And so your realtor really needs to know the market very, very well and needs to know what things are actually selling for and things are listing for, because they don't have public records to rely on to do that work for them. The other thing is that your realtor can weed through a lot of junk because they know what things, what a legitimate asking price is, and so use them and rely on them, and find a good professional to do it, to help you in this process. It is well worth it. Your cost of ownership. Okay, so we've talked about how to buy. Now we're going to talk about, well, once I own, what should I expect to pay? Well, if you're in the restricted zone, or you are one of the guys who are at least following what I might suggest, which is even if you're in the interior of Mexico, you still have a bank trust. And that bank trust fee is going to vary. It depends on the bank. It's between $450 and $650 a year. It just depends on which bank you're at. You're going to have your predial, or your property tax. Again, it's 0.26% here in the municipality of Benito Juarez, undeveloped residential property. you might well find that your property tax rate varies a little bit depending on where you're at. Our municipality gives you a discount if you pay early. So if you pay in December prior to the following calendar year's payment, so right now actually just a few more weeks, we'll have the opportunity to pay our 2015 taxes ahead in December of 2014. And the municipality always offers us a discount, and that discount's pretty substantial. It goes anywhere from 15 to 20 to 25% sometimes discount for paying early, so it's well worth doing. If you own property directly in front of the beach, and I'm not talking about on a beach access, I'm not talking about you can see the beach, I'm talking about property that has actual beach frontage, you're going to be assessed a beach tax, and it's assessed per meter of beach frontage. So you'll have that. Again, even if you own oceanfront property, the comparison on what you're paying between the property tax and the beach tax is minimal, considering what you would be paying in other areas. Now, your other, you might have some other fees depending on what type of property you purchase. Maybe you're purchasing in a condo or a subdivision that has a homeowners association. If you do, there's going to be some fees there. A note about homeowners fees, they are not necessarily comparing apples to apples. So when you ask how much the homeowners fees are, find out what they cover and what they don't cover, because different associations choose to set up their fees differently. And so, just a little line of, oh, well, somebody's HOA fees are $100 a month, and oh, this person's are $300 a month. You think, wow, well, it's 3 times more to be living there. Not necessarily, because if it's more inclusive of all the things you have to pay, then you might even end up cheaper, less expensive, going with the more expensive HOA fee because it's just all included. So really compare them carefully. They're not always comparing apples to apples just when you're looking at just comparing prices alone. You're going to have property insurance. You're also going to be paying utilities. So those are really your costs of ownership. Another thing people ask is, well, what's a notary? We talked about needing a notary in order to close, and he's the one that does the due diligence on the title. What's a notary? And especially if you're a U.S. citizen. If you're a Canadian citizen, this concept of a notary isn't probably so foreign, depending on which province you're from. But in Mexico, we call it a notary because it's a literal translation of the word. The word is notario, so it's notary in English, but the jobs are very different. In Mexico, a notary is a licensed Mexican attorney, and they're authorized by the government to oversee particular transactions, including buy-sell agreements for private property. So they are a neutral third party in the process. That's important to know. Okay, they're not working for the buyer or the seller specifically. They're working for both parties to make sure that the document that they've created meets the legal requirements, that the due diligence has been performed and the title is transferable, and then also to collect and pay to the various entities the various taxes and fees that are due for each property, and to make sure then the transaction gets registered in the public registrar of deeds. And so that is what a notary's responsibility is in a buy-sell transaction. They also do wills and power of attorney and all sorts of things. The only thing that they do that overlap is they also make sure that both parties are who they say they are, and that is analogous to what we know in the U.S. as a notary. They're making sure that Mr. and Mrs. Smith, present documentation to reflect that they actually are Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and so that's the only part of their job that overlaps with what we know in the U.S. as a notary to be. Other than that, it's a much more different definition. Well, once you know how to buy, once you know what to expect, then you've got lots of questions about how long can I stay? Can I drive a car? All these different questions. So we try to cover some of these. And if we haven't covered specific questions that you have, again, I welcome you to ask those questions in the question and answer session in just a moment. How long can you stay? Well, the answer is you don't really need a special visa to come down. You don't need a special visa to buy. If you fly down or you cross the border in a car, you're going to be given a tourist visa, and you can stay up to 180 days on that tourist visa. So when you come down, it says, how long are you going to stay in Mexico? And you can put 180 days. and they can authorize that. You could also put, I'm going to be there for 2 weeks. Well, if you put 2 weeks and you're authorized for 2 weeks, then that tourist visa is good for 2 weeks. If you decide to stay longer than 2 weeks, then you need to go back to an immigration office somewhere and have that visa extended, and they will extend it for up to 180 days. What happens if you want to stay longer than 180 days? Well, then you're going to need some type of a longer-term visa. If you're not going to be a tourist, you're going to be some sort of resident. And in Mexico, there are 2 types of visas. There's a permanent resident visa, and there's a temporary resident visa. Most people start out with their temporary, and then after a series of years, then you can apply for your permanent. You can also sort of leapfrog the temporary status and jump right to permanent under certain conditions. Sometimes it depends on the amount of investment that you have in Mexico. If you are a major investor, foreign investor in Mexico, they'll let you jump the line. If you have children that were born in the country of Mexico, you can apply for permanent residency. So there are some special circumstances where you don't have to wait the typical 4 years to go ahead and apply from temporary to permanent status. Again, I would recommend speaking with an attorney that deals with immigration to help you in that process if that's something that you're interested in. What a long-term visa allows you to do is stay indefinitely. So you don't have to leave the country after 180 days when you have a long-term visa. The other thing is that if you want to work in Mexico, you have to have a visa, and so to be authorized to work. So what happens is if you're thinking about working in Mexico, we'll talk about this in a little bit. I've got another slide on this, but if you're interested in working in Mexico, know that you do need either the temporary or permanent visa, and then furthermore the authorization to work. The long-term visas are also required if you want to have a vehicle. So if you want to buy a vehicle in Mexico, in order to register it, you're going to need a visa. If you want to drive in your vehicle from the U.S. or Canada, if you have a tourist visa, you can bring that car in, but it has to leave with you at the end of 180 days. If you are a temporary resident, you can bring your car down with you, and it can stay as long as your temporary visa is good. And then when you leave the country, the car has to go with you. You cannot sell it while it's here, so it's just here, and then you promise to take it out when you go. If you are a permanent resident in Mexico, you may not bring a foreign vehicle into the country. So depending on your visa status, it will dictate whether you can bring a foreign plated car in or not. But certainly if you want to buy a car and then register it in Mexico, you do need a visa. You can't do that on a tourist visa. If you want to open up a bank account, you can't open a bank account with a tourist visa. You've got to have some sort of long-term visa. So if you're planning on living here for longer periods of time, it may very well serve you to get one of these long-term visas. The other thing is that it's quite beneficial. If you're a golfer, for instance, you can pretty much pay for your visa with 4 rounds of golf. There's a local course here that is normally about $100 to golf, and they sell locals packages of 4 rounds for $100. You get to golf for $25 a round but you have to show your visa, so that gets you into all of those local discounts. The other thing is that if you're a homeowner and you're going to be doing renovations on your property, your renovations, they're called capital improvements, so they're improvements that you make to the property that actually improve the value of the property. Those are tax deductible, but in order for them to be tax deductible, you have to have what's called a factura, and a factura is a legal receipt in Mexico. So unlike what we're used to probably at home, we can't just take any old receipt and use it for a tax deduction. In Mexico, it has to be a receipt that has your name and your tax ID number at the top of it. And in order to do that, you've got to have a visa. So if you're going to be doing substantial remodels to your property, you want to make sure you get those remodels, the expenses of those remodels substantiated with these official receipts, these facturas. And in order to do that, you have to have a tax ID number. And in order to get a tax ID number, you have to have a visa. So long story short is you certainly don't need a visa in order to buy, but you may very well find that you want one of these visas once you purchase and you're going to be here for, for a longer term. if any of you are interested in working in Mexico, basically there are two options to get you down here working, okay? The first option is you're going to open your own Mexican corporation. And if you do that, you can have a visa that authorizes you to work and operate your own company, okay? You can work for yourself. The other thing is you can actually be hired by a Mexican corporation. And when you're hired by a Mexican corporation, it works a little bit differently than what you might think. What has to happen is you have to receive a job offer from the Mexican employer. And once you get that job offer, then you go solicit your work visa. So they're not going to let you come down here and have a work visa unless you've actually got a job lined up. So you line up a job, and your employer is usually pretty experienced in getting this done. But basically, with that job offer, then you can go to immigration back in your home country and say, look, I've got you go to the Mexican consulate office in your home country and say, I have a job waiting for me in Mexico. Mexican consulate, will you authorize me to get down there and get my visa? And they'll give you authorization to head down, and you show up at immigration then in the country and say, I've been pre-authorized by the consulate in my home country. I'm here, and I'm here to solicit my visa. And you can get a work visa that way. Now, know that your employer, and this is really from your employer's perspective, important, but think about this when you're talking about what kind of jobs you want to do down here. Is your employer has to demonstrate that your job position is not a position that an average Mexican employee can fill. And so typically those that get work visas have some, maybe there's some sort of have some sort of certification or degree in what they're doing. It is harder and harder to make the argument that was once made that was, well, they're an English speaker and I need English speaking employees, because so many Mexicans now know English. It's not necessarily a shoe-in that you're going to get a work visa just based on the fact that you speak English. So know that, and that way if you're interested in coming down to work, those are your two options. Whether you're coming down to work or whether you're coming down to retire or just vacation, there is one thing you need to know. You need to know when you travel abroad anywhere what your insurance covers. You need to know that because your insurance may not cover you abroad, and people are often surprised to find out their insurance companies do not cover them outside of the country, and they have to have a special rider in order to have coverage. So you need to ask, first of all, you need to ask your insurance company, do I have coverage if I leave my home country? And if they say no, then you need to get the supplemental insurance that will cover you. Then people start to ask, well, what kind of coverage should I have? And that is not an easy question to answer. It really depends on how much time you're here and what you can afford and what makes the most sense for your situation. At minimum, what you want is medical coverage that will cover you in an emergency, and it will also cover your medical evacuation fees. So if you want to be medevaced back to the U.S. because you've had some sort of serious medical incident, you want to be covered for that. So that's at minimum, you want to be covered for emergencies and emergency medical evacuations, okay? You can get very, very complete health plans here. There are health plans that are specifically for expats that live outside their home countries. I've had a plan through Aetna Global that was a type like that. There are Mexican health insurance plans that will cover you while you're in Mexico if you live here full time. You can apply for one of those, and typically those will cover you in the country, and they'll cover for you emergencies abroad. So they really vary. You need to check out your options, but health insurance is important, and it's important for you to have whether you're, again, traveling or retiring or working down here. You want to make sure you have at least minimum coverages when you are here, okay? Particularly if you're a retiree, because Canadian insurance, the Canadian national insurance period, but also U.S. Medicare does not cover you outside the country, and so you need to realize that and get some supplemental insurance so that you are covered whether you go to Mexico or anywhere else. A little bit more about medical services. Know the medical, one of the things that you might want to check out when you're looking at different areas of Mexico is, well, what are their medical facilities like? And we're very fortunate in the Riviera Maya. We have some top-notch hospitals and top-notch doctors. And that isn't necessarily the case if you're looking in rural areas of Mexico. So know what the medical services are and the quality of care that you might receive, and that may very well affect your decision as to where you want to live. we have, just for your information, if you are looking in the Mayan Riviera, Cancun has a hospital called the Galenian. It has multiple international accreditations. You can see them there. And Puerto Morelos also has what's called what I call the Medical City Project that's sort of on the horizon. There's been a push by Mexico to expand some of their tourist dollars by really promoting medical tourism. And so part of that is the creation of what they call in the preliminary phase the medical city, and they're basically planning to build a huge hospital complex of, world-renowned hospitals for Mexicans, but also for international tourists to come down and take advantage of. So anyway, keep that in mind when you're looking in whatever area you're interested in. We've talked a little bit about it. Last thing is if you're looking to rent or looking to buy, contact a real estate agent. Know that federal certifications are available. I mentioned I have 2 federal certifications to sell real estate, but they aren't required. And Mexico is modernizing and coming along and coming up to the speed of things that we sort of take for granted sometimes or just expect. State licensing requirements are not applicable for real estate professionals in all states. So in some states, you need absolutely no training and no certification to be a real estate agent. And a lot of people are surprised by that. There are some state licenses. Quintana Roo just passed their law this summer of 2014. So look for a licensed realtor in Quintana Roo basically within the next year. They're going to be releasing sort of the process of how we're going to get licensed very soon. And once we know that, we can go ahead and apply for the state license that's new. But this is brand new for the state of Quintana Roo, and I think only 11 states at this point have a licensing requirement. The rest of them do not. And if you're in a state that doesn't have a licensing requirement, then how do you pick a license? How do you pick a professional? How do you know you're working with somebody? Well, that person should be competent and should be able to answer your questions, and they should also be a member of AMPI. If you're that's the National Association of Realtors in Mexico, and if they're dedicating, their dedicated career is real estate, then they ought to be a member of that. And that's a pretty good indicator that you're working with somebody that is professional. AMPI members have to be, they're peer reviewed. They have to adhere to a code of ethics. There's continuing education, and we're constantly getting market updates, and we're apprised of new law changes and things like that. So you're working with someone who has access to the best resources available in Mexico if they are a member of AMPI. So that's a pretty good indicator. With that, I am going to leave you with this slide. If you want to see our website's listed there. It's MayanRivieraProperties.com. Some people wanted to subscribe to our blog, PuertoMorelosBlog.com. We offer different workshops, and those workshops are offered through our blog. So if you found out about our workshop but didn't find out through the blog, you might want to subscribe. I write the blog along with Kim. We talk about Puerto Morelos, so that you'll see Puerto Morelos town events. You'll also see all new listings that we have in our office. And then you'll also find information about living in Mexico and law changes and things that affect expats. You'll also find my contact information down there. You're welcome to email me if you have any other questions. But with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. What I'd love to do, I don't know if all of you are on a laptop or some way to communicate with me. If you are, if you send me in chat that you might have a question, what I can do is unmute your mic, and that'll save you a lot of typing probably. Do any of you have any questions? If you do, you're welcome to pop it into that chat box, and I will I'll go ahead and unmute your mic, and we can go from there. Joel, you're welcome. No questions tonight, and that's fine. I hope that you got something out of the workshop, and I certainly appreciate you logging in, and thanks to you for logging in and hanging out with us. I really appreciate you guys meeting with me tonight. This was a reschedule of last Thursday. My Jeep got a flat tire and left me on the side of the road, truth be known, swearing like a sailor, about 45 minutes before the workshop was supposed to start, and I couldn't get the tire off, and so it made me late. And so some of you are joining me that were kind enough to rejoin me today when I couldn't make the workshop last Thursday, so I really appreciate that. I don't see anybody else logging into the chat box, so I'm going to assume that you guys don't have any other questions. So certainly thank you for joining us tonight. And if you do end up having other questions, let me know. Just send me an email, and I will. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Have a great night, and I hope you took away some new information. Have a great night, and I hope to see you in Porto. Bye bye.